You've probably heard that the word salary comes from Roman soldiers being paid in salt. That part's actually true. What most people don't know is exactly how far that logic extended, because salt wasn't just a Roman curiosity. For most of human history, this single mineral was valuable enough to start wars, fund empires, and determine whether entire cities lived or starved. To understand why salt mattered this much, you have to understand what life looked like before refrigeration existed at all. Meat and fish spoiled within days, sometimes hours, in warm climates. Salt was one of the only reliable ways to preserve food for weeks or months at a time, which meant controlling salt wasn't just controlling a seasoning, it was controlling whether a community could survive winter, whether an army could march beyond a few days from its supply lines, and whether a city could stockpile food during a siege. This is the part that most people never learn. Salt wasn't just economically important. In many ancient societies, it was treated as something close to sacred. Ancient Egyptian priests used salt in mummification rituals, believing it played a role in preserving the body for the afterlife. The same practical preservation logic applied directly to religious belief about the soul. Chinese texts dating back over 4,000 years describe salt production as a matter of state importance, regulated directly by the government rather than left to private trade. By around 6000 BC, evidence from Romania shows some of the earliest known salt production sites, where communities boiled salt-rich spring water in clay pots specifically to extract the mineral. This wasn't a minor local craft. Archaeologists have found fortified settlements built specifically to protect these salt springs, suggesting that even in the Neolithic period, people understood salt was valuable enough to defend with walls and weapons. But there was a problem. Salt wasn't evenly distributed across the ancient world. Some regions sat on massive natural salt deposits, or coastal areas, ideal for evaporating seawater. Others had none at all, and had to trade for it, sometimes across enormous distances. This imbalance created some of the earliest long-distance trade networks in human history. Trans-Saharan caravans carried salt from mines in the Sahara Desert to West African kingdoms, where, at certain points in history, salt was genuinely traded pound for pound against gold. Rome took this dependency and turned it into infrastructure. The Via Salaria, literally Salt Road in Latin, was one of ancient Rome's most important highways, built specifically to transport salt from coastal saltworks near modern Ostia into the heart of the Roman Republic. Roman soldiers stationed along trade routes and frontier garrisons received a portion of their compensation as an allowance specifically earmarked for salt, called a salarium, the direct linguistic ancestor of the modern word salary. Whether every soldier was literally handed salt instead of coin, or given money specifically designated for buying it, remains debated among historians. But the connection between salt and payment was embedded directly into Roman military administration either way. Salt's strategic value didn't fade with the fall of Rome. It intensified. Medieval European kingdoms taxed salt heavily, and controlling salt production became a direct extension of political power. In France, the notorious gabelle salt tax, first introduced in the 1300s, became one of the most hated forms of taxation in the country's history, forcing households to purchase minimum quantities of salt at government-fixed prices, regardless of actual need. This tax burden fell disproportionately on the poor, and resentment over the gabelle became one of the specific grievances that fueled public anger in the lead-up to the French Revolution centuries later. If you're finding this story interesting, hit subscribe. This channel covers the hidden history behind everyday things every week, and there is more coming. Here's the surprising part most people never consider. Salt taxation and control weren't just European phenomena. In India, British colonial authorities imposed strict salt taxes and made it illegal for Indian citizens to produce or sell their own salt, forcing the population to buy it exclusively from state-controlled sources at inflated prices. Despite salt being naturally abundant along India's coastlines, this policy became one of the most direct symbols of colonial economic exploitation in the country. In 1930, Mahatma Gandhi led thousands of people on a 240-mile march to the Arabian Sea, specifically to produce salt illegally by hand, in open defiance of British law. The Salt March became one of the most significant acts of civil disobedience in the entire independence movement, all centered specifically on a mineral most people today keep in a shaker without a second thought. The technology and economics around salt shifted dramatically in the 19th and 20th centuries. Industrial mining techniques, railroads, and eventually modern refrigeration steadily eliminated salt's role as a critical preservation necessity. Refrigeration in particular, widely adopted across the developed world by the mid-1900s, effectively broke the ancient link between salt access and basic food survival for the first time in human history. Salt didn't disappear from importance entirely, but it transformed from a strategic resource worth fighting wars over into an inexpensive, universally available commodity, sold today for pennies per pound in nearly every grocery store on Earth. Salt's story spans roughly 8,000 years, from Neolithic settlements defended specifically to protect salt springs, through Roman military payrolls and medieval taxation systems, into a direct catalyst for one of history's most significant acts of anti-colonial resistance, and finally into something so cheap and unremarkable that most people never think about it beyond seasoning a meal. Here's the big lesson buried in all of this. Salt's value was never really about the mineral itself. It was about scarcity intersecting with genuine necessity, and once technology solved the necessity part, the scarcity stopped mattering nearly as much. Entire empires built policy, taxation, and military strategy around a resource whose value existed almost entirely because there wasn't yet a better solution to the problem it solved. The moment a better solution arrived, refrigeration, salt's power evaporated almost overnight, not because the mineral changed, but because the problem it had always solved simply stopped being a problem. It's worth remembering that the things treated as invaluable in any given era usually aren't invaluable because of what they are. They're invaluable because of what problem they're currently the only solution to, and that status can disappear the moment something better comes along. You probably have salt sitting in your kitchen right now, worth less than almost anything else on your shelf, and for most of human history, that exact same substance was worth going to war over. There's more of this kind of history waiting. Subscribe if you want to keep finding it.